Kia ora koutou katoa. Hello and welcome everyone. I realize I am the last thing between you and lunch, so I will make this quick, I promise. My name is Valerie Love and I am the Senior Digital Archivist at the Alexander Turnbull Library. I've been working with Born Digital Collections at the National Library for over 12 years now in a variety of capacities, but at its core, my responsibilities are overseeing the life cycle of incoming, unpublished Born Digital collections to the library. So for today's talk, I'm going to share some key takeaways from working with Born Digital collections over the years. When I first started working at the National Library in 2012, the National Digital Heritage Archive held 5.5 million digital objects spanning across 90 different file formats and comprising around 50 terabytes of data. Currently, the NDHA holds 51 million master files, 278 different file formats, and 1.2 petabytes of data, and is growing daily. And that doesn't even include access copies or derivative files. This is really just our primary files. That's a lot of digital. And yet, that is just a tiny fraction of the digital content being produced in Aotearoa, New Zealand. As individuals and as a society, we are continually creating more digital files and data than we can realistically manage over time. And this creates real challenges for future access to our contemporary culture and documentary heritage. As long as it's stored in reasonable conditions, a box of papers or photographs can easily last for hundreds of years. But for digital files, the exact opposite is true. If digital material is left on its own, it's almost certain that it won't be accessible in 100 years, maybe not even 20, sometimes not even in 10. And as most of us in this room know, digital collections require continuous proactive management. At the same time, there are significant resource challenges to preserving and providing access to digital collections long term. It takes significant energy, mineral, clean water resources to run the servers, data centers, and produce the hardware that digital files rely on. Digital storage itself is not cheap. So that means we need to be even more mindful about how much digital content is in our collections and what ongoing resources and infrastructure will be required to make that material accessible and be preserved for future generations. One of the challenges of digital archiving is that we need to be ready for the digital content being created today, as well as the digital technology of the past. A lot of times digital can be an afterthought amongst boxes of physical items coming into the library. In my early days of working at Turnbull Library, it was common for donors to include a random box of discs and CDs along with their papers without a clear understanding of what content was actually on those discs. With ever-changing technology, a lot of times the content creators themselves didn't have the tools or the resources to access that content themselves or their own digital files. So as digital archivists, we would then need to assess these discs to see if they had any relevant content to the collection. To protect the digital files themselves, we needed to transfer them from the original media carriers to our secure collection server for backup and safekeeping. And my colleague Flora Feltham spoke at NDF in 2019 about this very issue, which is available on the NDF YouTube channel, small plug. But it would often take months and sometimes even years, depending upon the size and the complexity of the digital collection, to fully appraise these massive digital and hybrid collections. There were often large amounts of duplicate files and material that was simply outside of the scope of our collecting policy, but was maybe on the same disk as something else of significance. So we often receive legacy media as part of our collections. We have a suite of tools available to help us assess the content, and we need to be able to understand the technical dependencies of digital files in terms of the required hardware and software to ensure that we can provide meaningful access to them in the future. And in recent years, Turnbull Library has become much more selective and proactive in our digital collecting, encouraging donors to play an active role in digital appraisal. This approach isn't always possible, but when we are able to work in partnership with content creators to identify significant digital files from among their personal digital archives, it has real benefits in terms of researcher access and usability for the library's Born Digital collections. But there are always surprises. As part of our Born Digital Unpublished acquisitions process, we generate a file list and ingest report to document both metadata and the individual media carriers that we receive in a collection, as well as listing the individual files themselves. And this allows us to track individual media carriers and files through our entire workflow. Now, this is an actual disc that came into our collections as part of a donation a few years back among the personal papers of a writer and journalist. While the stickers were rather retro and charming, they pose some real preservation challenges to us. They impede the movement of the shutter, which is how the disc is actually able to be read. And we also didn't want to damage our legacy 3.25-inch floppy drives by putting a disc that could potentially damage it because of the decorations on it. So we needed to do some triage, some cleaning, a little bit of pre-preservation work on this disc before we could even see what was actually on it. So when we triaged the disc, and also when we ran it against our tools, we discovered that the disc had PageMaker 4 files on it. And they could be read partially using a text editor, but there was also a lot of content that wouldn't render properly without PageMaker 4 software. So to provide meaningful research or access to this, we would need to do further work such as emulation or migration. But then after all of that work, cleaning the disk, looking at the files, we discovered that this was actually completely out of scope for our collections. So didn't even matter. So I've been talking so far about older digital files, but what about new? Just because content is online doesn't mean it's preserved. In fact, it might be at more risk of disappearing. The average lifespan of a web page is 100 days. The average website disappears after 2.7 years. And yet we rely so heavily on websites for information, and we expect that they will continue to be there in the future. So as part of our Born Digital collecting, the library harvests websites. The New Zealand Web Archive currently contains over 10,000 web titles and over 54,000 web instances, covering subjects like government, sports, environment, music, arts, community groups, and so much more. But we've also recently launched a new tool to make it easier to search within large and complex websites in the archive. The New Zealand Web Archive Discovery Platform allows keyword and full-text searching within archived websites. Currently, there are 2 collections available in this search tool, but we are continuing to index and add more to it. And finally, if you found any of what I have to say interesting, then save the date, 3 to 7 November. I'm sure people are so sick of hearing me talk about this, but I made a vow that I would not give a presentation this year without putting in a plug for iPres, and that's what I'm doing. The International Conference on Digital Preservation is being held just across the road here in Wellington later this year. This is a big deal. This is the first time this conference has ever been held in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and only the second time ever in the Southern Hemisphere. It was last in Melbourne in 2014. So we would love to see you there. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. And thank you all so much for coming today. We really hope you've been enjoying your time at NDF. And that is all. Thank you.